What should small businesses look for when hiring a vCISO? And maybe even to add on to that, what are some of the questions that they should be asking?
Um, I kind of mentioned this beforehand in the preamble about what a virtual CISO is, but what you should look for, at least from the resource, is their experience. You should look into then also, um, what's the best way to say this? I'm gonna open up this can of worms for a second. You need to understand their motivation. And what I mean by that is that there are some cases, and this is certainly not the norm. I want to be clear about that to begin with. But there are some cases with managed security providers, managed service providers, or managed security service security providers, too many acronyms here, that they will provide a virtual CISO service that may or may not be more along the lines of a virtual ISO, which there's nothing wrong with that, and B, may be acting sometimes subconsciously as an inside salesperson for the MSP. Now, let me explain that for a second. What I mean by that, we've talked about gap analysis and determining risks. If you're employed by an MSP that sells a certain product to mitigate a risk, you may have a bias for finding gaps or prioritizing gaps or both that then that solution can then solve. Now, again, I'm not saying that that's ubiquitous across the board, but you have to understand the motivation of the virtual CISO. You have to look into also, if you are contracting with a virtual CISO, whether it be a person or a service, one of the things you don't want to have happen is to have virtual CISOs come and go. You want to make sure that whomever is assigned to your account, I mean, there's going to be staff turnover. That's just the way things are. But in general, you want someone that's going to stay with you for an extended period of time. And why is that? Because when you first, as a virtual CISO, when we first start engagements, you have this ramp up period where you're spending time learning the environment, learning the as is. You gain all of this institutional knowledge. And the more institutional knowledge you have, the better you can help um, identify and prioritize and then mitigate risks, because that's the way that you want to do it. You want to prioritize and then mitigate risks based on the risk to the business, not based on any sort of external factors. And if you have CISO turnover, vCISO turnover, you may have this next person asking the same questions and missing where not having some sort of control here really affects the bottom line of the organization, or could. And then some very basic stuff. You want to look for references. You want to make sure that they have adequate insurance, liability. The cyber may not be a bad idea as well too. They should practice what they preach. They should the virtual CISO, either as a contractor or more likely as a firm, they should have an information security policy and be able to show that they do a risk assessment, that they do their vendor management as well too. All these things comes together, and you know what, Jason, that just you made me think about that. It's like maybe putting together a small pamphlet, like checklist, things to look for in a
Yeah.
virtual CISO. That might not be a bad idea someday.